Folks, welcome into another episode of SportsbookReview.com's Roundtable series of videos. We've been prepping for the draft and getting ready, but there's still a lot of stuff in the NFL that we need to hit and go over. Primarily, there's some good free agents still left out on that list in the NFL. Going to bring in my esteemed panel today, Gary Seegers, Ian Cameron, and Teddy Savransky. Let's get right into it here, Gary, because we're going to talk quarterbacks here. There's two of them out there right now. Past Heisman Trophy winners, some MVPs, some been the Super Bowls. These guys don't have teams yet. Let's start right away with the top. Down in Auburn on the Plains, Cam Newton obviously had an esteemed career here with the Carolina Panthers. Only 31 years old in NFL terms for a quarterback. That's still relatively young, but I got to say, Gary, I'm not hearing much about where Cam Newton's going to end up right now.
Well, the problem is you're not going to be able to get your own team's medicals on him until sometime in the future, right? He's coming off of a shoulder injury. He's coming off Liz Frank injury. He's got problems. Obviously, he was not able to play really last year. And in the two games that he did play, he looked awful. Now, the good news is he had a year off, basically. He didn't play after week 2 last year. He was done for however long. He was on the shelf. He was healing up. He was getting ready to go. I think he's a beast, but I don't think there's a starting job out there for him. Wherever he ends up, he will be a backup, and I think that's okay. I think that he can earn a starting job back, but as of right now, coming off of 2 big-time injuries for quarterbacks, especially with somebody his size, I think a backup role would be good for him.
It's kind of interesting, Gary, because when you bring it up, you take a look to see what he said over the past few days. Like, look, I'm like a fish out of water right now. I'm not used to this. You know, everybody was recruiting me to Florida, and then I went to Auburn, and obviously being the number 1 pick. He's not used to being on the sidelines and waiting for an opportunity. If you're taking a look at the NFL right now, because, again, your point is correct here. There's not a lot of starting jobs that are open and available. If it were you, Gary, and you were advising Cam Newton, you had your pick in the entire league, where would you send him right now, even if it's not going to be a starting job?
I would go directly to Pittsburgh. I would go to the Steelers. I would sit behind Ben Roethlisberger. You know that the rest of their quarterback room is kind of hot garbage, right? It's not very good. You saw it last year. I don't believe in Mason Rudolph. I don't believe in anybody else that they've got there. I would go there and sit behind Roethlisberger, and you know that Roethlisberger has had injury problems, the same as Cam, but it's another guy that's built the same way as you. They've got speedsters on offense. All of their skill position guys are fantastic. That's a great team for you to be sitting around. It's a great locker room already. The coaching staff is consistent. They are stable. I would go directly to Pittsburgh and sit behind Roethlisberger and learn a new playbook and get ready to play whenever he goes out.
Ian, 2 weeks away from the draft here. Cam Newton, as you said, 31 years old, still sitting out there. Maybe you get that motivated Cam Newton, but also, you know, Gary brings up some good points. We don't really know the full medicals here. He was cleared enough to be cut by the Panthers, but I know teams are going to want to bring him in, see where his mindset is. Where do you think he might land, and what is the approach here that you would take if you were advising Cam Newton?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. It's hard to gauge, but we know that there's obviously a connection with with Ron Rivera in the past in Washington. Although I'm not sure they're going to go that route. You know, the Chargers and Dolphins were talked about it, but now they're looking at probably a franchise quarterback, drafting one in the draft coming up. So I don't think they're going really to Cam Newton, and the Chargers seem to be hell bent on going forward with Tyrod Taylor. I keep going back to Jacksonville, you know, as a potential landing spot for Cam Newton. I mean, Gardner Minshew, I know Nick Foles traded Gardner Minshew, the guy that they've settled on as their starting quarterback there. But I could see them giving a veteran presence behind Gardner Minshew. Of course, we know there's all kinds of injury concerns with Cam Newton, health concerns. We know about the 0-8 record in terms of his last 8 starts as a starting quarterback. I mean, he's just had a terrible time winning football games in Carolina as well. But I think Jacksonville is somewhat of a possibility. You know, you would have said maybe a couple weeks ago, Donnie, New England, but, you know, that's not Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick's going to maybe look at Stidham as a stopgap this year or draft a quarterback, you know, late first round, second round, third round, maybe a Fromm, you know, Jordan Love, someone deeper in the draft at the quarterback spot. I don't think he's going to really target Cam Newton for New England. So when it all is said and done, I think the Pittsburgh idea that was thrown out there is not terrible. I mean, you certainly can't you don't know what Ben Roethlisberger is going to do. You know, Mason Rudolph's been up and down. And Duck Hodges, he put the word in duck last year with some of his throws. They were ducks coming out of his arm last year, Duck Hodges. So when you look at it, Jacksonville's probably the team that I would say if I had to pick one, that's I think where Cam might end up.
Teddy, when we take a look at some business issues here with Cam Newton as well, you're talking about a guy that's used to making a lot of money. Starters in the NFL, $15 to $20 million a year, especially when you're hitting the free agent market, which he technically is. I would doubt, Teddy, if he goes somewhere and they say, hey, you know what? We'll give you a look-see, 1 year, $800,000 and maybe some bonuses here. If it was up to you, Teddy, if you're advising Cam Newton or just looking around the league, what's a spot where he can land here?
There's not many. And I really don't think we're going to see Cam Newton as a starting quarterback again until another starting quarterback gets hurt. You know, from all indications, and again, maybe it's just fluff and maybe it's just it's sending people in the wrong direction, but the Chargers are saying, hey, we're going to go with our guy who was Tyrod Taylor. And as soon as you bring in a Cam Newton or anybody else, now that upsets the apple cart in that regard. It's the same story in Jacksonville. It's like, hey, we want Minshew. Minshew's our guy right now. You have to let your guy crash and burn before you bring the other guy in, or everybody's looking over their shoulder. It's a bad organizational move in those spots. You know, Miami. And let's not forget, all these teams we're talking about have the potential to draft a quarterback in the first round, use that as a project, pay them pennies on the dollar as opposed to paying Cam Newton real money. You know, and with 3 or 4 QBs likely to be selected, a minimum in the first round, there just aren't a lot of spots for this guy, especially when we think about the other QBs who are available. Not that Flacco or Dalton is anything great, but they'll come cheaper than Cam Newton will. And if there's one QB who I'm like, I got to win a Super Bowl this year and I got to pick a free agent quarterback, it's going to be Winston, not Cam, because what Gary said was 100% correct. Cam Newton last year was not a good quarterback. All right. I mean, it doesn't matter how you want to stretch it. He did not pass the eye test. He didn't pass it in preseason. He didn't play in preseason. And then he didn't pass it in the regular season. He didn't pass it the year before. I don't know if Newton's on the downside right now, but he's certainly not a QB that has an obvious landing spot to even contend for a starting role this year. If I'm Cam Newton's agent, any offer I get, sign on the dotted line.
Yeah, a lot of athletic ability in Cam Newton, also taking a lot of, damage running the football over the years. If we take a look coming in here, Gary, I'm going to bring you back in. Let's go with another quarterback that we could take a look at. Jameis Winston, 26-year-old. He's going to be out there. Heisman Trophy winner. We've seen him do some good things in the past. Tom Brady, the new flavor of the year down in Tampa Bay. Where might Jameis Winston land? Maybe in that area where the Chargers, with a team that needs a starting quarterback and still can invest in a younger guy?
I wouldn't go that far. I think they are bent on drafting a quarterback. I'm going to go with the Detroit Lions. Matt Stafford obviously was out for a part of last season. I think that having him in as a backup role to learn in that offense, all this talk about New England, etc., I'm out on that. I think that it's the Lions. I think that's the perfect spot for him. It's indoors. He got the LASIK surgery. I think a backup role for him to learn under somebody else would be great.
I think it's a great point you bring up here. Ian, I want to bring you in on this as well. When we take a look at Jameis Winston overall, he's still only 26 years old. So he can afford to have one of those years where you take that step back, maybe recondition yourself, go to a team. Let's just say, I'm just using teams out here, Philadelphia Eagles or Kansas City, somebody with a coach that can mold you and get you ready to be a starting quarterback again. Jameis Winston, a lot of talent. We saw him throw for a lot of yards, but boy, you can't turn the football over at a high pace in the NFL and be successful. A spot for Jameis Winston, Ian, where are you looking maybe?
Yeah, again, it's going to be a very difficult decision because you're talking about a lot of the same teams that you would consider for Cam Newton being those same teams you would consider for Jameis Winston. With the Chargers, they seem like they're going to draft a quarterback upcoming first round. They're going to go forward this year with Tyrod Taylor as their stopgap. Now, we got to remember about Taylor, too. He did make the playoffs one year with the Buffalo Bills. You could say their defense was the big reason why, but he still played relatively decent enough at least to get them there. So I think the Chargers feel comfortable with that. I think on the Patriots, as I mentioned, with Cam are out, Jacksonville potentially. That's not a bad thought about the Lions, Donnie, or the Eagles, or the Chiefs, or these teams that have been to the playoffs in years past. That maybe Jameis Winston can step in there, learn a few things moving forward. Maybe the Rams, for instance, Jared Goff didn't exactly have a great year last year, and maybe Jameis Winston pushes him. He at least can learn from the good offensive mind that is Sean McVay, coach of that Rams team. Why not the Rams, in my opinion?
No, there's a lot of teams we could bring in. Teddy, if we take a look here at where Jameis Winston might land, but also bringing up Cam Newton in your estimation, I'd much rather take a flyer on Jameis Winston, more of the thrower, obviously, where the NFL is going in that direction, as opposed to maybe a read option quarterback, but more for his legs and not so much for accuracy. I think Jameis Winston does get picked up more than first before Cam Newton. What are your thoughts and opinions on Jameis Winston, and then countered with Cam Newton as well?
I don't think it's close. I think that Jameis Winston is the better of the two quarterbacks right now, and moving forward will be. Again, we're talking about two former number one overall draft choices, but one's 5 years younger and doesn't have the injury history. you know, so when you find a situation where you can get the two guys for the same price, but one guy's 5 years younger and doesn't have an injury history, it's not a close decision. But when it comes to locations, it's still the same story. There's not a lot of spots for these guys. And when I say, where does it make sense for Winston? It makes sense to me. I don't look at Gardner Minshew as being a franchise QB. Okay. I really don't. So if I have a chance to get Jameis Winston for pennies on the dollar in Jacksonville, I'll do it in a second. But it's not like the Jags are going anywhere this season. It's not like they're a quarterback away from contending. To me, that makes the fit that makes the most sense. And New England be interesting. I don't know that Belichick will take that Winston is his type of guy. I'll just put it that way in terms of when it comes to protecting football. But we're talking about a guy that led the NFL in passing yards last year. We know he has talent. We know that he can help someone get wins. Jags to me makes the most sense.
It's interesting because now we've talked some quarterbacks here and going over the top names on that list, see where they could go. Let's talk a little bit of defense here. And you got to tell the Seattle Seahawks sort of painted themselves into a corner here, acquiring Jadeveon Clowney from the Houston Texans. But also let's keep in mind that was under the guise of we're not going to franchise tag you. So Clowney says, free agent. Everybody wants a pass rusher. I'm 27 years old. I want $20 million a year and has now come off that and is down to that $17 to $18 million range, but hasn't had any bites yet here. We're talking in the past couple of days, maybe the Cleveland Browns are now jumping into the equation, but that would be a big loss for a Seattle defense that thought that was going to be the cornerstone of their defense over the next couple of years. Gary, let's talk about some landing spots for a high-profile, high-priced defensive end here.
I would have to stick with the Tennessee Titans. I feel like that defense with Mike Vrabel and all of them, what he did in Houston, he seemed more comfortable in Houston than he did in Seattle. Now, Seattle, he was still the most disruptive defensive player on the field, but I'm going to roll with Tennessee in this one. I don't think Cleveland is going to end up biting on it. I think Clowney fits in really well with Vrabel's defense in Tennessee.
There you go. So taking a look at Tennessee, Ian, high-priced defensive ends here. Look, like cornerbacks and quarterbacks, there's not a lot of those to go around. So if you do get them, you have to pay for them. Any landing spots you have an idea that maybe Jadeveon Clowney can fit into, Ian?
Well, there's definitely a lot of a need for edge rushers out there. And I've heard this white noise about the Browns, too, as Gary mentioned there, that they're interested. I don't know if I see it. I know they've already got Myles Garrett as a dominant pass rusher. I don't know if Jadeveon Clowney's that's something they're going to end up pulling the trigger with. The Titans are certainly an obvious team that could use a guy like Jadeveon Clowney. Now, he's not coming off his greatest season by any stretch last year in Seattle, but Tennessee makes sense. New York Jets could use some help in terms of getting to the quarterback. They were one of the worst teams in the NFL last year in terms of sacks, in terms of quarterback pressures. Does make some sense that they may be interested in Jadeveon Clowney. Maybe a little bit of a dark horse, the Buffalo Bills. They need a little help at edge rusher just because of the fact a lot of their edge rushers are older. Jerry Hughes is an older player. Addison's an older player. They're in their 30s now, and they might be looking at maybe in a direction in the next year or two. So maybe a little dark horse option for him with the Buffalo Bills. But I think Titans and Jets, 1A, 1B, are the two teams I think are most likely maybe to look toward Clowney.
Yeah, it should be interesting. Teddy, I'm going to bring you into the conversation here because we're taking a look at a defensive end, and we keep, it's a lot of price tag that goes along with it, along with age, but also last year being injured as well. This is a guy that presumably you're going to have to pay 5 years, $125 million, which is what he's looking for, and not sure that he's actually worth it. Anything outside of the quarterback position, getting into those numbers sometimes for a team doesn't make financial sense. Teddy, give me a landing spot or two that you might be looking at where Jadeveon Clowney might go.
Well, I'll take the under $100 million on his contract for the limit. He's not getting it. That's what he wanted, but it doesn't look like the market is there right now. I don't disagree with that. But one advantage that an edge rusher is going to have that a quarterback is not going to have, for example, is half the league needs an edge rusher right now. I mean, easily half the league. You know, the Bills, the Cardinals, the Dolphins, the Falcons, the Giants, the Jets, the Lions, the Panthers, the Rams, the Red. I mean, you can go on and on down the line. You know, Seattle will bring him back. Houston would bring him back if they could. I mean, you know, the Titans, the Vikings. He could go in any number of places, but it's a different market than the QBs. QBs you don't have to pay this year. Clown, you're still going to have to pay. But you know, at least the fact that he hasn't signed doesn't. You know, this isn't a Manny Machado situation where he's going to sit around, and then finally the one team that wants him to pay him a bunch of money. I think there are a good handful of teams that want Jadeveon Clowney. They're just waiting for it to develop, and of course, everybody is waiting to see what's going to happen in the draft. You say when you have a guy like Clowney who's out there, yeah, you make a move before the draft, but a lot of times this sits for a couple of weeks until after the draft, and then the teams that didn't solve their defensive end problem come in and make offers.
Yep, should be an interesting flow right up until draft day, going over to see where some of these free agents land, and even after the draft to try to fill out some of these rosters. We do want to thank you for tuning in to SportsbookReview.com's Roundtable Series videos. Today, of course, going over the NFL and top free agent drafts. If you haven't done so yet, hit that subscribe button in red right below. Get those notifications turned on every time we come live with another video to get delivered directly to your inbox. We're going to shoot these videos and keep you entertained all throughout the summer. Stay tuned right here on SportsbookReview.com.